Michelle here with Poetry Saved My Life. Today we're continuing our American Poet series with Edgar Allan Poe. The last poem we did with his was Annabel Lee. If you missed it, I'll put a link in the description box so you can check that out. It's a beautiful, beautiful poem, so I really recommend you checking it out if you missed that. Today we're going to do probably his most famous poem, The Raven. Now, The Raven is a narrative poem, which just means that it is like a story, right? It's pretty much like reading a short story. So you have a main character who is the narrator, and then the Raven, of course, is the antagonist in the story, in the poem, narrative poem. This poem was published in 1845, so just 4 years before Edgar Allan Poe's demise. So, once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping on my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this, and nothing more." Ah, distinctly I remember, it was in bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my book surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here for evermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came a-tapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more." Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wandering, fearing, doubting dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the darkness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with the mien of lord or lady perched upon my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grace and stern decorum of the countenance it wore, Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou, I said, art sure no craven. Ghastly grim and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore, tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door. Bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before, on the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by a reply so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of this his hope that melancholy burden bore, of nevermore. But the raven, still beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining, on the cushion's velvet lining, that the lamplight gloated o'er. But whose velvet violet lining, with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then, methought, the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, and repent from the memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, whether tempest sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert island enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell me this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word or sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave me black plume as a token of that lie that soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit thy bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul, from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor, shall be lifted, nevermore. So great, right? I'm sure you've heard it before, or at least snippets of it. It is, quite popular, especially around Halloween time. I think The Simpsons even did an episode where they featured part of it. So, I know you've heard at least Once Upon a Midnight Dreary. If you know Blues Traveler, they stole that for the line of one of their songs. But yeah, it is quite a story, right? It is very macabre, very sad, and you can feel, this is one of the things that Edgar Allan Poe was so good at in his stories and poems, was that you could feel the tenseness, the longing, the fear building in the poem. At the beginning of the poem, you have the narrator, this man who has lost Lenore, he's lost his love, and he's just sitting thinking, he's napping, he's starting to, head nod, we all do, sit in a comfy chair by the fire, right? He's starting to fall asleep, and is consumed, with loss and thoughts of his love, Lenore. And he's starting to fall asleep, and all of a sudden he hears a rapping, right? A tapping on his chamber door, on the door to his room. And he's kind of like, oh, okay. And you can see at the beginning, he tells himself, oh, I'm sure, it's just someone knocking on the door, and then I'm sure it's just the wind, there's nothing there. And when he opens the door the first time, he doesn't see anything, and then he, opens the window, he doesn't see anything, and then the raven just walks right in. And when he describes the raven, he describes him as stately, like a lord or lady, right? So the raven is not flitting about. He says he's not flitting, he's not fluttering, he's not typically how we think of birds. He's not flapping his wings and flitting around, hopping around like birds do, right? He just walks right in, bold as brass, right? Like he owns the place, gets right up on the bust by his chamber door, and basically the raven sort of taunts him. He asks him, please tell me that there's some respite. Please tell me that I'm going to be all right. He's looking for comfort. Is there going to be an end to this sorrow, to this longing? Am I going to see Lenore again? And every question he asks the raven, he answers nevermore, right? So as the poem goes on, the narrator becomes more and more agitated and fearful, and is convinced at the end that the raven is some sort of specter or devil who has come to taunt him or harm him, something. And you could feel him trying to convince himself that, oh, he'll leave in the morning, he'll fly away just like any other bird would have done. And then he comes to the realization in the end that the raven is not leaving, and he has no ease from suffering at the end. So it's pretty horrifying and sad at the same time. And it's interesting because I've heard this poem so many times, and I've heard so many different takes on it. And so I wanted to just kind of bring up a few of those. One of those is that the raven represents the pain, the darkness, the hollow emptiness inside the narrator, that the raven is a personification of that, or a representation of that pain and darkness, and that's why raven is chosen, right? That's one idea. Another idea is that the raven is Lenore. The raven is symbolic of her soul, or that it is her, that it's her coming to visit him. That's another idea there. So I'm not really sure what I'm not convinced it's Lenore, although I bet you could convince me if you had a really good argument for it. I sort of think of the raven as a representation of his darkness. But yeah, it's really interesting to discuss and to figure out what other people are getting from it. So the poetry reads you, right? So I would really love to hear what you thought of it, what your interpretation is, if you think the raven is Lenore or something else, or really is a devil or demon or spirit. Let me know. Let me know what your thoughts and feelings are on it. I would really love to hear it. Also, please give me an email. Send me an email if you are so inclined, if you have ideas of poems or poets that you'd love to see on the channel. You can email at poetrysavedmylife43@gmail.com. I really hope you enjoyed it. Again, please comment and let me know what your thoughts are on the raven. And I hope you will hit that like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any other Poe works or anyone else that we'll be featuring on the channel. And I hope you have a lovely, lovely poetic day. Take care.